In this video, we're going to look at experimental data. At the end of the video, you should be able to organize and create a spreadsheet for how you'd want to keep track of data in an experiment. So to get started, in general, we create an experiment to answer a question. So here are some examples of some questions we might ask and build an experiment for. Number one, which fertilizer produces the healthiest tomato plants? Another question might be, does a new drug work better than a placebo against fighting the cold? Another question might be, which water filter gives the best tasting water? Another question could be, does eating more fish during pregnancy lead to smarter babies? So in each of these questions, we could create an experiment to help us find an answer. So notice in each of these questions that we have posed here, there are two types of data that we'd want to collect information on. So let's break that down a little bit. So the first question, we'd want to determine what type of fertilizer are we using, and then what is the health of that plant. In the next question, we'd want to keep track of the new drug and perhaps the dosage, or if this person took the drug or not, and then how their cold symptoms lasted or persisted. The next question, we'd want to keep track of which water filter we're using and the taste of the corresponding water. And in the last question, we want to keep track of a pregnant woman's diet, in particular, how much fish she's eating, and the smartness of her baby. So for these questions, if we created an experiment to find an answer, we would have to collect data. So in an experiment, we create a lot of data. So let's take a look at one of the example questions we might ask, and that is, which fertilizer produces the healthiest tomato plants? So we saw that there's two bits of data we'd want to collect here: the type of fertilizer, maybe even how much we apply. So we could say type of fertilizer, amount applied, frequency that we apply the fertilizer, and then the health of our tomato plant. So we might do the number of tomatoes. We might note if there are any pests. We might keep track of the height of the plant. And maybe there would be other measures or data that we'd want to collect with that tomato plant. So with all of that data, it's really important that we are able to record it in a clear, meaningful way. The best way to do that is to use a spreadsheet to organize your data. So what would that look like? So here are some main points that you'd want to include in your spreadsheet. And we're going to look at this example in a little bit. But so how we'd want to organize our spreadsheet is to have each row in the spreadsheet. So we're thinking of a collection of rows and columns like this. And we're going to see how we can use Excel or Google Sheets in a minute to organize such data. But the rows in our spreadsheet are going to represent each trial, each participant, maybe each type, for example, each type of fertilizer here, maybe each application of fertilizer. So those are the rows. Often these are referred to as the cases in the experiment or the participants in the experiment. So one of our rows might be using Dr. Earth fertilizer. And then each column is going to be either an identifier. So we might put here Dr. Earth in the first column to recognize that we are using a Dr. Earth brand. So that we call the identifier. And then we also list each variable in the column. So here we might put in then the amount applied, the date applied. We'd also keep track of the health of the tomato here. So number of tomatoes, height of plant, so that way we can read off our data very easily from our spreadsheet. All right, so now let's take a look at how we'd actually set this up in an Excel or Google Sheets. So here I've just created a Google Sheet to help us keep track of our data from our fertilizer experiment. Google Sheets works very similar to Excel, so you can use either program. Here I just went to Google Sheets and opened up a new spreadsheet. So to keep track of our data, we want to make a very clear spreadsheet. So again, each row is going to represent a trial or a participant or a type. So I'm going to go ahead and label that first column type of fertilizer. So this type of fertilizer is going to be an identifier of each row. I'm in fact going to bold this first row because the first row are just going to be headings for us. So then now we'll list the types of fertilizer that we're trying. We looked at Dr. Earth. Maybe we looked at fish fertilizer. Maybe we looked at fancy plant fertilizer. We could have looked at Farmer's Almanac fertilizer, etc. Okay, so maybe that's enough for now. Oh, we'll add worm tea also. All right, so then what is the information that we're collecting about each fertilizer? Well, we might collect information about amount applied. We might want to collect information on frequency of application. And to make that more explicit, instead of having each cell here, maybe a different unit, we might want to specify the units. So number of times applied each month. That way, the variable, the values that we put here already, we know what the unit is going to be. So that's data that we might want to collect on how we are using the fertilizer, but then we want to collect information about the results of using that fertilizer. So we might want to collect number of tomatoes on the plant. We might want to collect information, is there disease? This would be yes or no. Or maybe we'd want to keep track of the type of disease and maybe the height of plant. And then maybe just if it's alive or not, alive or dead. Maybe some of the fertilizer caused our plants to not do very well at all. All right. So as we use our different fertilizer, we're going to then put in the amount supplied. I'm going to go ahead and put a unit here too. So we'll do grams per square foot. So maybe we put in 100 Dr. Earth, maybe the instructions said 90 for the fish. Maybe we're looking at 250 for fancy plant, Farmer's Almanac, 80, worm tea, 20. Number of times applied, maybe we have some certain numbers here each month. And then we've collected info on the number of tomatoes, maybe 22, 30, maybe only one here for fancy plants, etc. Disease, we could have noted disease or not. And some of this data, maybe we didn't even want to collect. If we just wanted to know the type of fertilizer and the health of the plant, then we might just want to know or collect data on disease and type of fertilizer. I'm just adding more here so we can get a sense of how we'd create a spreadsheet if we're collecting more data. So now we have 4 feet. We have, or 5 feet, 4.5 feet, 3, 5, 6. Okay, alive or dead. They're all alive, let's say. A for alive. Okay, so here now we have all of the data that we collected from our experiment. From here, we can then use strategies and methods that we'll learn in the next section for how to analyze this data and obtain results from this data. Thank you for watching.